This is the OC GoStream M2, and it's a capture card device as well as a HDMI video switcher, so you can use it both ways. So I'm just gonna unbox it quickly. So this is the box that it comes in, and this is the start guide. So officially they call it a dual HDMI switcher. So it's more of a switcher than a capture card, but it also functions completely fine as a capture card if that's how you want to use it. There's also this leaflet here, which is about how to get support from OC in case you need support. And this is the bag that it comes in. So it's a hard case, and there's a HDMI to HDMI cable in there. Full-size HDMI cable, by the way. And also there's a USB cable, USB-C cable to either USB-A or USB-C. So you have this adapter here, which you can use to connect to a USB-A port or a USB-C. But the device you connect it to has to support USB version 3. So if you connect it to a device that doesn't support USB 3, then you will have reduced resolutions. And this is the device itself. So just to compare it to the size of my hand to give you some context in terms of how big or small this device is. So in terms of what comes in the box when you buy it, you have the box itself, the hard case, USB cable, HDMI cable, user guide or manual, and a leaflet which tells you how to get support from OC. The GoStream 2 weighs 150 grams, and in terms of its dimensions is 12.2 centimeters length and 8.06 centimeters in width and 2.7 centimeters in thickness. It doesn't have a fan, but it has some opening here on the side which will let air in and out to keep the device cool. So that exists on both sides of the device. And the advantage of it not having fans is that it won't actually create any noise. So if you're doing video recording, there won't be any noise coming from this device. On the bottom of the device, there's two pads to stop it from slipping if you have it on a table. But there are no screws for mounting it to a tripod or anything like that. In terms of ports, it has two HDMI in ports which support 4K at 60 frames per second. So you can input 4K at 60 frames per second into these two ports, and these two ports are HDMI 2.0 compatible. And there's one HDMI out port, so this supports outputting 1080p at 60 frames per second. So you have 4K at 60 frames per second going in and 1080p at 60 frames per second coming out. And there's a USB-C port which is used for powering the device. So you can power it with a power bank or a USB-C charger or even a computer. So just connect this to the USB port on the computer and it will power the device and let it run effectively. And the power consumption of this device is 5 watts. So that's 5 volts at 1 amp, which means you can power it with even the most basic power banks. You don't actually need power delivery or one of those power banks that are expensive and can produce high voltages and high currents. This same USB-C port, aside from functioning as a power source for the device, it's also used to output the video. So this is essentially the capture card functionality of this device. So it can output 1080p at 60 frames per second through this USB-C port, and it supports the UVC protocol. And when you connect this to your computer, you want to connect it to a computer that supports USB version 3 to make sure that you can get a full resolution of this device functioning correctly. On the other side of the device, there's a 3.5mm microphone input port, which also provides power for a microphone. And there's also a 3.5mm line input audio port. And the one thing about this line in is that it switches the left and right audio tracks. So if you haven't combined the audio on both channels, I want to keep it separate. Just keep that in mind that your left and right channels will switch when you use this port. And it also has a 3.5mm headphone output port. In terms of buttons, it has 4 buttons for the picture-in-picture mode, and each of them has a different positioning of the picture-in-picture, as you can see. And there's 2 buttons for picture-by-picture mode, which is essentially the side-by-side split screen view that you can get. So one for horizontal split and one for vertical split. And on the right-hand side of the device, there's 2 buttons which are for zooming in and zooming out. So these 2 buttons are quite useful. So when you have any of these picture-in-picture or picture-by-picture modes, you can zoom in and out and it will adjust the view. And there's 2 buttons for the HDMI input source, so whichever one you want to output, you can choose that. And there's also 1 button for switching the video. So this button can be used whether you want to switch the video when you have picture-in-picture or picture-by-picture modes. So you switch which video is the master one and which one is the small one. Or you can also use it to switch between these 2. So you could press this button and this button to switch between the HDMI output, or you could also press this button which switches it automatically. And since you only have 2 inputs, there's not much to think about. So if the video you're viewing is not the one you want, you just press the middle one and it will go to the right one. So I'm going to connect this up on 2 HDMI inputs. So I'll put one to a camera and I will put the second one maybe to the camera that I'm filming right now with, and then we'll see the output of what actually comes out. And I'm not going to connect the USB-C port to a computer. Instead, I'm going to connect it to a USB charger or a power bank. So my aim is to use this as a portable solution. So that's why I think it's important to show that everything will work in a portable setup and not just with a computer. And I think there's already a lot of videos about how to use this with OBS and video capture software on the computer. Okay, so let me talk through what I have set up here. So I have the HDMI output from my GH6 coming into the GoStream M2. And I also have the HDMI from this camera that you're looking at coming into the second port on the GoStream M2. And then I have a HDMI going out to this screen, which is essentially showing either the camera footage from this camera or the camera that you're looking at. So I can actually change the 2. So if I set it to 1, this will go to the GH6 camera, which has something in front of it, which is the EasyCap box. And if I go back to 2, this is what you're looking at. And here you can see the details of the camera, which is recording this. So the interesting thing is that this camera that you're looking at is actually recording at 25 frames per second. So you might be able to see that there. And we have a 1/50th of a second shutter speed there. And the other camera is actually recording, well, it's not actually recording, but it's in standby and it's in 4K 60. So if I go back to the second camera, this camera, I've switched off the overlay for the HDMI to this camera because I use it for streaming, but essentially it's set to 4K 60. So the GoStream M2 is able to both take the input from 4K 60 as well as the input from a 25 frames per second, and that's 1080p 25 frames per second, and then output it to the monitoring device. So if we do the picture-in-picture mode here, you can see that there's a small picture-in-picture there, and we can increase this. Okay, that makes it smaller, this makes it bigger. Can increase the size until it's reasonable. So this is to zoom in and this is to zoom out. You can choose the size. And we can obviously also switch it on which corner it sits. So I can switch between those, and the buttons will show the light on which one is actually configured at this point in time. And the LEDs have flickering lights. So if you're recording video at a high frame rate with a fast shutter speed, then keep that in mind if this is going to be captured in the video footage. So here you can see top right, bottom left, top left. And we can make them smaller or bigger. And we can obviously switch back to the full screen by pressing this. Now the other thing, I want to go back into picture-in-picture mode. So as you can see this here, if I do a switch with the middle button here, it switches which one is the main footage and which one is the side footage here. That's also quite useful. So if you get this wrong, you just have to press this button to get the right footage in the corner. Now the other one is the split screen. So here you can see that the split screen has these black bars on the side, so it's not taking up the full width of the screen, but instead what it's doing is to make sure that it got the full footage into the screen, so it has to squeeze it in. If you don't want that, then you can increase the size, but then what will happen is that it will chop off the top and bottom of the video footage. So it's up to you how you want this to look. And if you want the side-by-side split, that's again how you do it, and you got the black bars on top and bottom this time. And if you want to increase the size, you can do that, but it obviously crops off some of the footage. I think that's in terms of the functionality. So it's really simple, and that's one of the advantages of this device, that you just have a few buttons. All the functionality is really easy to use. You don't really need to think about any of the functionality. You can just use the buttons and it's quite obvious what happens. So I've used the HDMI out now. What I want to try now is connect the USB-C to a phone and see whether a phone will be able to pick up the video signal and show it, as opposed to using the HDMI out. Okay, so I've pulled out the HDMI output cable from here. So I've removed that. And what I have here is the USB-C port. Instead of that going to a USB-C charger or power bank, now it's connected directly to this phone. So this is a Sony Xperia 1 Mark V, but I don't think the phone should make a difference what phone it is. The point is that you can see that the phone is able to power the GoStream M2, and at the same time it's also receiving the footage. So it's both powering the device and it's also receiving the footage output from the GoStream M2. And if I change the camera angle, now you can see that I went to the other camera angle, and I can also do the picture-in-picture so that you can see both of those. So in terms of having a portable solution which you can take with you and stream from a camera or from two cameras and switch between them and feed that video into a smartphone so that you can stream it or upload it to YouTube or Twitch or wherever you stream to, it is possible. And if you were concerned about charging the phone, then you can also get a small USB-C hub, and I guess you can connect one cable to the hub, one to the phone, and one to a USB-C power bank or a charger. Now, another thing I wanted to test was to see whether the microphone on the GoStream M2 actually powers the microphone. I know it does, but I just want to test it for the sake of having a complete demonstration here. Okay, so I've plugged in a microphone into the microphone port, and this microphone requires power for it to run. And I have these earphones, which I'm going to plug into the headphone port to monitor the audio. So now I can hear myself, and also here you should be able to see the audio levels. If I tap on this microphone, the audio levels will go up. If I point this microphone at myself and speak, you can see that the audio levels go quite high. Whereas if I point it away, the audio levels will be lower. So I can confirm that the microphone port provides power for this microphone and it works. So to talk through the use cases for this, one is that you connect two cameras, which I have here, one camera here, and one camera which is recording this, and you output it into a device, whether that's with USB-C or via HDMI for live streaming, and that works quite nicely. So this is particularly good if you're a solo operator and you want to live stream sports. There are other use cases which are covered in detail on YouTube, which you can look at, which is for gaming. So you have your two HDMI in connected, one to the game console and one to a camera, and then you have the picture-in-picture option so that you can have your face and your gameplay recorded at the same time. And also you can use it for conference calls and presentations. So if you want to have your presentation up and you want your face in the corner as well, then you can do that. And that's also an effective way to do it. Another use case for this device is for demo videos. So for example, if I'm showing a camera, I can connect one input from the overhead camera to this device, and I can also connect the HDMI port of the camera into this device, and I will have a single output. So what I can do is show the overhead shot and the screen recording from me browsing the menu items of a camera within one output and I can control that or have it side by side or picture in picture. So that's another use case for this device. But my use case is to have multiple cameras by a single operator in a sport venue. So you have multiple cameras, 2 cameras in this case, connected to a device which can do streaming. I mean, it doesn't need to be a device with a screen because there's lots of streaming devices that you can get, and you plug in a 4G or 5G SIM card or Wi-Fi and it streams automatically. So you can use those devices as well. It doesn't need to be a phone. But here, because I wanted a screen, I wanted to do it on a phone so that you can actually see how everything fits together. And I think being able to live stream with 2 cameras and the ability to switch between these and use both HDMI out and USB-C for the live streaming is very useful. And you also have the option to obviously connect a microphone to it or a line in. And the advantage of that is, for example, you have 2 different cameras recording a sporting event, but then you want the audio to come from the commentators. Then you can use the microphone or the line in to connect that audio sound to this device and then output it for your live stream. And I think the best option or the best way to do that would be to actually use wireless microphones. So you give 2 wireless microphones to the commentators and then you plug it into the line in or microphone depending on how you've configured it, and that gets added to the live stream broadcast. The only thing is that you need to control the volume on the camera to make sure that it's not so loud that you can't actually hear the commentators. So the main advantages of this device is that it's really light. It only weighs 150 grams and it's made out of plastic and it's really small, so it's shorter than a smartphone, maybe slightly wider or the same size, and it's slightly thicker than a smartphone, so it's more thick on the back and slightly less thick on the front side. I don't know if you can see this. So this is because it's made to essentially sit on a table. And one of the things I wanted to mention about the Ghost Stream buttons is that they're soft, so they don't actually make any noise when you're pressing them, which could be captured in video. A few things to keep in mind about this device is that the line input switches the left and right. So if you haven't merged your audio to be the same on both channels, then that might be something that you'll realize. In my case, the audio will be combined anyway, so it won't make a difference because I'm using it for live streaming. And another thing is that the LEDs have flickering lights. So if you're recording video at a high frame rate with a fast shutter speed, then keep that in mind if this is going to be captured in the video footage. If you plug in a microphone or the line in, the audio will be combined with the audio from the HDMI. So if you don't want the audio to be combined, then you can switch off the audio in the camera and just use what you're putting in here. Or you can have a different device that deals with the audio before it actually comes to this device. And this device has been created to sit on a table, so it doesn't have a 1/4" 20 thread that you can mount it on a tripod. So just keep that in mind, that if you want, then you can use probably a phone holder to keep this in place and then attach it to any camera cage or a tripod or whatever else you need. There's a few different ways of comparing this device to other devices. So one is to compare it as a video capture card, and the other option is to compare it as a HDMI video switcher, or compare it to other devices which have both the functionality. So essentially, they are a video switcher which also provide video capture through a USB port and push out a UVC compatible video output. So if we compare it to another device, which is a video capture card, there's one video capture card, which is the EZCAP 364 GameDock Extreme 2.1. So this one, the GameDock Extreme 2.1, weighs 228 grams, whereas the GoStream M2 only weighs 150 grams. So the GoStream is substantially lighter and it is smaller as well. So you can see that the EZCAP is thicker. Should be able to see that it's slightly taller and slightly wider. And another thing about the GameDock Extreme is that it only has one HDMI in. So as a capture card, it might work fine, but it only has one HDMI port in. So I can't use it as a video switcher. But with this device, you can input 8K at 60 frames per second, and it can output 4K at 60 frames per second to a USB-C port. But it doesn't have a HDMI out. So the HDMI out that you saw on this device, that's actually just to have a pass-through. So if you're doing gameplay, it will pass through the same video footage that comes in and out of the other direction. Whereas with the GoStream you have the option to do like picture in picture, and you have 2 different HDMIs. So not quite the same device. So in that sense, I would say the GoStream is more useful if you want to record a sporting event and you want to have a portable device with you. You can connect it to 2 different cameras, switch between them, and share the screen between them, and output it either through HDMI or through USB-C to live stream it. Whereas with the Game Dock, that's not possible because you only have one HDMI in. So I think the Game Dock Extreme is for a different use case when you just want to have one camera and stream that, as opposed to having 2 cameras. Another device to compare this to, which I don't have, is the Rode Streamer X. But the Rode Streamer X weighs 350 grams, which is over twice as heavy as this one. And I think that's because it has audio controls and XLR input. But in my use case, I don't see those as advantages because it also means that it will consume more power. And then if it consumes more power, that means I need extra batteries to carry with me, in addition to the additional weight of that device. And it's also bigger as well. So it's 14.4 centimeters by 12.2 centimeters by 5.1 centimeters. So it's bigger in every dimension. So it's definitely not as portable. But what's a deal breaker for me on the Rode Streamer X as well is that it only has one HDMI input port, which again makes that a device to be used for a different purpose, not what you can use the GoStream M2 for, since it lacks the portability that you get with the GoStream M2, both in terms of weight and size and power consumption. And it also lacks the functionality, so it wouldn't have 2 HDMI ports, which the GoStream has, and all the picture-in-picture modes, all of it with buttons. Now, another device which is more similar to the GoStream M2 than the other 2 that I've mentioned, is the J5 Create Dual HDMI video capture card with the model number JVA06. So that one weighs 172 grams, so it's still heavier than the GoStream M2, but not substantially. And that one is made out of aluminium, and it has 2 1/4-inch 20 threads. That one is slightly bigger, so it is bigger but not by a lot. Its length is 13.46 centimeters, and its width is 6.37 centimeters, and its thickness is 1.84 centimeters. So in terms of thickness, it's actually less thick than the GoStream M2. But one of the things you have to realize about the GoStream M2 is that it's thicker on one side, but thinner on one side. So with the J5 Create Dual HDMI video capture card, that one has 3 physical buttons which let you switch off or switch on any of the audios that are coming from various inputs. So you can switch on HDMI 1 input, HDMI 2 input, and the audio from the microphone port on the device itself. So you can have any combination of those 3 audios going to your output depending on how you choose those buttons to be on or off. Another functionality which the J5 Create capture card has is that it has chroma key for green screen functionality. So when you do picture in picture, then you would be covering up less of the main image. But the buttons on the J5 Create are quite clicky, which can be captured in the audio if you're doing video recording. The J5 Create has 2 USB-C ports as opposed to 1. So there's one USB-C on that for powering the device and one for capturing the video output and also allowing pass-through charging. So one of the USB-C ports would power the device, and the second one, which is connected to your computer or your phone or whichever device you're using for live streaming, it could also power that device. And the other thing about the J5 Create unit is that its HDMI input ports don't support 4K. Anyway, let me know if you have any questions about this device, or if you want me to compare it to another device in more detail, or if you want me to showcase one of its functionality in more detail.